What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Rustomod Garage. We have finally finished our Rambler station wagon. We got it running and driving after we fabricated the entire chassis out of a C4 Corvette, installed an LS with the T56, and then implanted our body from our 1961 Rambler station wagon onto our entire chassis. Throughout this entire process, we have filmed this entire series a few years ago. I edited the entire thing, put it up so you guys could watch the entire process of how we made this thing, and now we're back in the current time where I can show you guys kind of what happened with the build, what we did wrong, what we ended up improving on through the years, and what different things have led to where it is now. Currently, the Rambler is sitting on the lift because it's broken. Whenever we first got the car running and driving, we wanted to do a shakedown test, and we had ended up missing our deadline to do Hot Rod Power Tour in the car. So we decided to go to Holly LS Fest, which is in Bowling Green, Kentucky. But not only did we decide to go to the event, we ended up deciding to drive it there. Which it was a good thing that we didn't go to Power Tour because we discovered a bunch of issues with the car just driving it around our shop that we had to deal with before we went to LS Fest. The first issue that we had was fifth gear in our transmission ended up being bad, so we sent the transmission off to get it rebuilt. While the transmission was getting rebuilt, we ended up freshening up the motor with new gaskets so it didn't leak any motor oil or anything. Installed the transmission whenever it came back, and that was pretty much it. Originally, the rear end out of the Rambler is a Dana 44 out of a manual transmission 1987 C4 Corvette, but that rear end ended up giving us a bunch of issues. It had a 305 final gear ratio, and we wanted something a little bit more aggressive. And so after we got back from LS Fest, we decided to change the gear ratio to a 411. And I'll get farther into that when I give you guys a walk around of how the car is now. Besides some final interior changes to the car is pretty much how you guys have seen it on the last episode whenever we drove it out of the shop for the first time. We still need to do the wiring harness for the entire car. We need to do an interior refresh. We need to tidy up some mechanical issues that we've been having with the suspension, and a bunch of little issues that we can make the car a lot nicer than where it was whenever we completed the build. We also ended up switching our engine management system to a Holley Terminator. It allows us to be able to tune the car on the fly. That way we can monitor what's happening with the engine and see the different parameters that we couldn't see with the stock Camaro PCM. So since it's on the lift, I'll give you guys a full walk around, show you guys what we changed, what are some of the issues that we had with the car whenever we drove it for the first time, and what some of the issues that we're going to have to fix and address so we can get to this year's LS Fest, which we'll see you guys there at Holly LS Fest East. And you guys will see the Rambler there, and you guys will see our all-wheel drive C10 project that we'll introduce in next week's episode. So stay tuned for that, and we'll hope to see you guys at Holly LS Fest East. So now I'll give you a quick walk around of the Rambler. Alright guys, so appearance wise, the Rambler is pretty much the same from the last time you've seen it. Probably a little bit dirtier, but overall the Rambler has not changed very much from its appearance whenever we drove it out of the shop for the first time once we put this whole thing together. I'll give you guys a better look under the hood since in the videos I did not focus on under the hood too much. Alright, the first thing that we're going to have to fix and address for this Rambler is this stupid hood latch. It just has had so many issues with it. Every time you open the hood, it binds up. Tried to clean it, I tried to adjust it, nothing seems to work. And part of the reason why it doesn't work, the center support for it is no longer hooked up because of the way we had to mount the battery. But I think we're going to end up with a different style hood latch that will work for the way we have the front end of the car hooked up. So as you can see here in the Rambler engine bay, it's a little bit tighter than whenever you saw it in the last episode because we had changed the wiring harness. Just with time, whenever we did this entire thing, I hadn't filmed any of this stuff, was not on my priority. I was going to school, doing this at the same time, also building a few other vehicles. But there's a lot of YouTube videos on installing a Holley Terminator. It's very straightforward. And whenever we rewire the car, we'll be sure to do an entire video on rewiring the Rambler the correct way. The first thing that we ended up changing whenever we drove the Rambler is that little Camaro radiator would not hold up. It was a single core radiator, and we ended up going to a 3-core radiator and making some custom brackets for it to hold it in. and that ended up working very well, and it's never had an overheating problem. We still have the electric fans from the Camaro that were originally on it. They mounted to this Camaro radiator that's just an aftermarket version of the Camaro radiator. It fit really well into the Rambler with width-wise. The battery is still mounted up front, which I'm not really too satisfied with. I'd like to probably move that to the back at some point. We're just unsure of what we want to do with the back of the car. We ended up mounting our fuel system, which we've actually done 2 or 3 times now, just because of the way that we had it done. I'd like to now redo the entire fuel system with a -10 PTFE line, so we could eventually probably run an E85 kind of mixture on this car, and it would be a little bit more fuel flow than just the rubber hose that we have standard on it right now. Like I said, this motor had heads, cam, and intake, and so whenever we got the motor, it was already tuned from the factory. So once we installed our Holley terminator, it was very easy for us to be able to go through the parameters when we set it up, and it is on a base tune that Holley sent, and it's actually been on that tune for about a year now, so it worked very well, and it's run very, very well since we've had it. We have had some injector issues, which we've installed some aftermarket injectors, thanks from our friends from Texas Speed, and that had solved some of our problems that we've had with the car before. On our way to LS Fest, we actually had an injector fail and had to drive from Lexington, Kentucky to Bowling Green, Kentucky on 7 cylinders, and had to fix our LS motor in the parking lot of LS Fest. Not a fun time, but we ended up making it there and making it back with very, very minor issues regarding that we just built the entire car in 2 months. So another issue that we're going to have to address on the Rambler is our power steering pump and hydro boost setup. It works good, but whenever you try to turn and hit the brakes, it sometimes overpowers the power steering pump and pushing out the seals on our power steering rack. And that's probably a governor spring issue with our power steering pump. So we're going to try to modify the power steering pump to be able to work with our rack and pinion from our Corvette and our hydro boost setup from the Mustang that we ended up getting the hydro boost from. All right, so moving on to the interior of the Rambler, I had installed a different shifter that was different from the Camaro shifter originally, and I replaced the steering wheel. I put these different bucket seats in there. We tried to do autocross with this car, and I'll put up a video of it now. The car does really great autocross. The suspension works very well. The car handles awesome, but you just get thrown around everywhere in those Lincoln Aviator seats. We still have the back ones back there. I ended up finding these aftermarket seats, and I kind of like the color of them. A lot of seat companies don't make really cool colors. They're usually just black or red or something. But I really wanted to make the interior of the Rambler pretty nice and do like a full console, do a radio, and just match this tan leather interior to the green. I think it's a really good color combination. I'd like to finish the interior of the Rambler, and that's something that we're definitely going to do in the future. Moving in here, you can see I just have the Holley screen kind of on the dash, and I'd really like to be able to integrate some of the gauges and everything with the Rambler gauges. They're just some of the coolest looking gauges, and the dash is so cool. Whenever we did the swap, this dash actually unbolts, and we were able to bolt it back in whenever we did the whole chassis swap, so we could weld up our firewall and everything. But we did have to cut this side of the dash, and that really hurt me because I really didn't want to cut this dash up. I actually have the side that's supposed to go here upstairs, so I'm going to have to trim it out so I can fit it back into that spot and get a working glove box. The glove box is just kind of sitting there for now until we wire the entire car up, so that way we can get this thing finalized before we start making permanent adjustments to the dashboard. As you saw in our build series, we kind of just have everything really simply with fuses and switches just to get the car running, and it's been like that for a long time, but we want to get everything working with the key, with our Corvette steering column, and get everything working how it should in a normal car instead of just kind of thrown in there how we have it right now. I didn't talk about it too much in our build videos, but this is actually the midshift kit for our T56. The rear of the transmission is actually farther back, and the midshift kit's more set up for like a truck. I believe the Viper truck used a very similar setup, and the T56 is just really an awesome transmission. It allows you to have multiple shifter locations, so that way you can put pretty much anything where you need it in your swap. We went with the forwardmost shifter location, and it fits perfect with the seat where your arm's usually supposed to go for a shifter, so we ended up doing that. Moving on to the rear, you guys can see our aviator seats are still in here. They're just folded down because we had a bunch of junk back here. They're still in there, still how they were. Another thing I want to add is these door sills. It's supposed to be a piece that goes there that says Rambler or something. So I want to add those in, but whenever we added our frame literally is a box channel that is inside of this entire rocker. I just have to drill out these holes because it will go into our frame to be able to put this piece in. That's the only reason it's not in there. The carpet in this car is actually still from that Lincoln Aviator. We had to modify it some for a transmission tunnel, but it's just seen better days. I mean, it's not in the greatest of shape. As you can see, it's kind of stained and stuff, so I would really like to get a carpet for this thing. The Lincoln Aviator carpet fits perfect, so maybe I could try to buy a Lincoln Aviator carpet kit and just try to cut it up like this one. Not really a fan of this beige color, but try to get something a little bit darker to kind of match these bucket seats that we got going in here. Now in the back of the Rambler, pop this open, and nothing's finished in here because we don't really know what to do. I really wanted to add that third row seat that was in the back here originally, where you could look out of the back of the car, but I kind of like the storage idea instead. We're trying to put like a floor back here where I can lift it up, put some storage back here. That'll give us a little bit more room for a fuel cell. Our fuel cell mounts right under this, and it's just very, very close to the ground. So I might want to raise this up a little bit and put a bigger fuel cell in here eventually. You can see our cage is tucked really nicely up along the headliner, and it was really easy to do whenever we had the entire body lowered down onto the frame. I never really had a good shot of it, but you guys can see how good that cage came out. It tucked perfectly up there. You can see where we've tied it into the frame rail. But yeah, not really much going on back here with the rear of the Rambler. Still kind of incomplete, and that's something you guys will see on a future video whenever we do the entire interior of this car. All right, so now I'm gonna lift it up and show you guys underneath so you guys can see what we've changed underneath. There's quite a bit of things that we've changed from the original rendition of the Rambler. By the way, I completely forgot to tell you guys why we have these rails on our lift. We had to get the suspension settled on the Rambler, so we ended up making up a 4-post setup where you can drive on the lift and lift the Rambler up so we can see where the suspension is, because we're having a suspension rubbing issue in the rear and wanted to see it under full compression. So we made these rails up where the tires can sit on them, but the lift could still lift it up so we can get a better look at it, because we got to get this thing fixed so we can do some track events at LS Fest East, and we look forward to doing that. I've never raced this car on a track before. We've done autocross and drag racing, but it would be really cool to see what this thing can do on an actual road course. So we got to get this suspension fixed, and I'll show you guys the issues that we've been having. So this is our fuel system that I didn't really give too much attention to in our build videos. This fuel tank originally hung down probably about another 2 inches, and it just bottomed out like crazy. On our way to LS Fest, we ended up ripping a hole in the bottom of it and running on a boat tank from West Virginia all the way to Kentucky. It was a mess. But we now got it back, got it trimmed up, and put these little stops on it so that way it'll hit these before it hits our tank. It actually hits the bottom of the floor here. We can see a few times it's rubbed before it hits the tank now. So we got that issue solved, but we just have a bunch of fuel slosh issues that I'd like to probably switch out for a different tank. I would really like to go to an in-pump fuel tank, but it's so thin, I don't know if I would be able to fit an in-pump on this tank. Right now, I'm just running a Bosch 044 fuel pump with a fuel pressure regulator on it. Outside of it, but it just does have some fuel slosh issues, so I'd like to get that solved. Moving up to our rear suspension here, as you can see, we have a little bit different rear setup than we did whenever we started the build process. We sent the rear differential to be rebuilt and have 411s, and it actually has a true track in it instead of the clutch based LSD that it had originally from the Corvette. It's a 411 gear ratio, and it's much better than the 305 that it had. Still, with the 6-speed, it wants to almost stall out. It's just a low gear ratio for the 6-speed in this, but it cruises very nicely on the highway. It tacks about 1500 RPM at about 65-70 miles an hour. So it's pretty perfect for this setup. We have aftermarket Mark Williams half shafts that we installed because for the spindle on the rear, we had broken this about 3 times. Whenever we were at the drag strip, every single time I went up to make a pass, it snapped. I broke 2 axles and 1 drive shaft, and in the Camaro that this came out of, I broke the rear diff. So this motor just does not want to go down a drag strip. Finally got it sorted and trying to get it dialed in without breaking anything. As you can see, we've ran stainless fuel lines through the entire bottom of the car. Our exhaust is wrapped and V-bands are all in. As you can see, we've bent a few of them. The exhaust wrap is kind of coming off. We didn't want to weld this entire exhaust because we wanted to put an X pipe in it eventually. We haven't been able to do that yet, just on our time schedule. So we kind of just have zip tied aluminum gaff tape on it just so we can breathe in the car. On our way to LS Fest, that was our only option to get this thing sealed up a little bit so we could breathe inside this thing. It was really bad, but we ended up getting that kind of fixed and just need to take this entire exhaust out, weld up the entire thing, put an X pipe in it, and it should be done. We did end up putting these Flowmaster mufflers in it. Also, we put these resonators in it just to quiet it down a little bit. As you saw our first drive video, it was really loud. We didn't have any muffler on it and it was extremely annoying. We still have our Lincoln Aviator sound deadening. Fits up here pretty good, makes it look pretty factory looking. It is kind of dragging. This car is very low and does drag some, but it does quiet down the interior quite a bit, especially with that carpet in there. It's very thick, so helps with the noise some. Transmission, once we had it rebuilt, has never had an issue. Motor has never been out since we pulled it the first time. Doesn't really leak much oil. Our front suspension now. So you can see it's all wet under here because of this rack. We leak a ton of power steering fluid. Every time I drive this thing, I have to put power steering fluid in it because of our Hydro Boost over pressurizing this rack and leaking out. We put a rag on it just for now, but we are going to be replacing this rack for LS Fest, so that way we won't have any issues on the track. As you can see, a good underneath look of our C4 Corvette front suspension on this Rambler. You can see kind of where we tied in the frame from the C4 to our frame that we ended up fabricating and then running that all the way back. So really good look underneath here at how we fabricated this entire thing. Also, you guys out there doing LS swaps and maybe doing custom cross members and mounts for your guys' LS swap stuff, try to get these C5, C6 motor mounts. These things are awesome. You put 1 bolt there, 1 bolt there, and it's it. It bolts straight down from the motor mount on the side of the engine. Very easy to get in and out. It's probably one of the best motor mount setups that I've seen for LS swaps. But yeah, the C5, C6 motor mounts, definitely get those things in your, if you can, in your project. It's definitely worth having. Very easy to pull this motor out, service it. It's just a great setup to have. Because in this car setup, the rear suspension sits a lot lower than it would in a C4 Corvette because of the amount of weight that the rear has over it because of the whole station wagon body. It weighs a lot more than a C4 Corvette. We actually weighed this car at around 3,500 pounds without the Lincoln Aviator seats in it. With the Lincoln Aviator seats, it was around 3,700 pounds. Very heavy seats with the heating and cooled aspect to them. But with the amount of more weight on this car, these stock leaf spring setup that the Corvette has just puts a lot more stress over the components. So we have to adjust everything to account for the amount of weight that the car has now. Another drawback to our rear suspension setup and our front suspension setup is we just put it on these airbags. We have these adjustable airbag shocks on the front and the rear, and they suck. These things are terrible. You can see them up there. They pop all the time. They rub on everything. Their ride quality actually isn't that bad, but they just have a bunch of issues. And if anybody knows a good coilover for a C4 Corvette, let me know, because I will buy them. I need to get coilovers on this thing, and it will be solved. Our suspension issues have been hurt because of it not being on coilovers. The car will drop in ride height, smack things. It's just super low. And if we could get a coilover in it, then that suspension issue will be solved, and it'll probably ride so much better. So if you guys know a good coilover company to reach out to, let me know, because I will definitely like to install coilovers on this in the near future. That being said, we are still running the leaf spring. We do have it tightened up quite a bit more than factory just because of the ride height. But other than that, we have not changed too much on the Rambler since you guys have seen it in the build series. Be sure to check that out if you haven't seen the entire build series, where we see the entire concept of this car and how we put the entire thing together. So from here on out on the Rambler videos, they're going to be pretty much up to date. You can see us fixing some of the stuff that I had mentioned. We're trying to get this thing ready to see you guys at LS Fest East. So if you guys are out there, definitely say hello. We're trying to race this thing on the entire road course they have set up. So that'll be a really awesome video. Also at LS Fest East, we're going to have our all-wheel drive C10 that we build. And you guys will see more videos on that project next week. So next week, we're not gonna be doing any Rambler videos. We're gonna just be doing C10 videos from then on out until we go to LS Fest. And then I'll upload some videos on us fixing the Rambler so we can get crunching on this thing so we can get both cars out there, because both cars definitely need some work before we drive them hard for the weekend. So hopefully we see you guys out there, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.